monitored by the government, but by us as well. So, all right, well, let's all stand and pray. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, Lord ever present, fill us all things, treasure of good things, and giver of life, come dwell in us and cleanse fall in purity and save our souls, O good one.
So, back.
Oh, that's not going to help at all. Never mind.
Yeah, the cameras.
It's light up. Very good.
So, I've already introduced myself. I'm Father Dimitri. I'm a temp priest here, but here to have my go at the Catechism course. I'm really not sure how to proceed in this because usually I just kind of have a slideshow of stuff, but I guess that can go through what you guys read previously from the Philokalia. Okay. So I guess straight off the bat, I always encourage people to say things and ask your questions, because me just talking at you doesn't tend to generate thoughts for yourselves. So does anyone have any questions about the readings off the bat?
Where were the readings? I think this one.
No, I forgot to send them out.
Oh,
So what I was going to send out was a brief confession by St. Demetrius of Rostov, which is a preparation for confession, which is based on an examination of conscience. And I will send that out for this week for us to read. But we can also discuss the readings from the week before, which was the commandments, and kind of figure out some of that, because we didn't get too much discussion on that anyway. Does anyone have any more questions on Matthew 5-7? Or Father Dimitri to answer?
I read that Jesus Christ said that the most important commandment may have been the first one, which is to love God with all your heart and love thy neighbor. And I was talking to my brother today about that, and he said that the other commandments are kind of like branching off from that one. Do you agree with that?
well, remember that Christ says that from these basic commands to love God and our neighbor is all encapsulates the entirety of the law. The law expounds upon that, but that is the foundational commandment from which all the other ones branch out. So yes.
And the commandments came from Moses. I mean, they came from God, but Moses.
Yeah. Well, so we have the first set of tablets, which were church states and tradition was written by God directly. And then obviously coming down, the golden calf, Moses smashed those, and then the second set he wrote by
I didn't know the two sets.
Yeah.
He had to write two because the priests were being problematic the first time.
That sounds about right.
It's absolutely accurate. Anytime anyone tries to tell you that the priests are somehow elevated from the people, the priests from the very beginning, they were established and they started building idols, and ever since then they've been problematic.
Are you
So,
talking about like the Pharisees, or is it?
oh, before the Pharisees, I mean, it was Aaron. Aaron was the first of the priesthood, and one of the first things he did when Moses left was build a calf. But even then, you see the heresies throughout the history of the church, and they were all promulgated by the clergy. So.
Any other questions? Okay. I don't quite know at what point we were left off from discussion of the Ten Commandments from last week. So I'm going to assume that we should just go into vices. Were virtues discussed previously or no?
To some degree, but not that much. So that was going to be today. We're going to kind of talk about what the right virtues are in relation to the vices and all of that fun stuff.
Okay. So, forgive me, I'm trying to think of a good way to go about this. If we think of virtues and vices, what defines a vice? As in, is a vice something in of itself, or is it something defined in relation to something else?
Probably a little bit.
Yes. So the way that we kind of view vices is not that vices exist in of themselves, but they are an expression of a lack of something. So when we say vice of lust, it's a misuse of love, for example, rather than it itself existing as its own thing. It's something that's a misuse or a distortion of virtue, of love. And this can be reflected in all of the vices. So I don't know if it's beneficial just to say them all, but we can probably just list from what we have from the Theoclia and yeah, and we can talk about each of them. Or if any of you have any direct questions immediately about, oh, what's, I've heard of this, but what does that mean? So the 8 vices listed in the Theoclia by
St. John Cassian.
Cassian, yeah, was gluttony, lust, unchastity,
Yeah.
avarice, anger, dejection, listlessness, self-esteem, and pride. Sure, all of you have heard those before. Is there any that you immediately have in your head? Like, let's talk about that.
Acedia.
Sorry,
Acedia. Was that one?
Listlessness.
listlessness,
Sloth.
sloth.
The greatest sin of our generation.
So I think it's reflective of the importance of being productive, not necessarily in a kind of material sense of always, striving for a gain of something, as much as keeping yourself occupied. We have the phrase, idle hands are the devil's playthings. So it's actually quite, it's not a mistake that when a novice enters into a monastery, they assign him with constant tasks to do, whether that be tending to animals or this or that thing, is to keep them busy instead of leaving them to their own devices and making yourself build up something to keep your mind busy, and versus just having something that's productive that you can do. So yeah. Does that make sense when I say that? Yeah. So
I had heard the word passivity.
passivity. So
Or not taking responsibility.
yeah. So when we say listlessness, that doesn't mean necessarily that we just don't do anything generally, but it's also avoidance of responsibility. This can also be expressed in the sense of usefulness of time. So one thing I think is important is that people have this idea that in order to be productive in any given sense, you need to allocate like blocks of time. Like if I want to pray, I have to make sure I have an hour of nothing happening, just quiet, in which I can dedicate myself to that. And what it ends up doing is that we don't end up praying at all, because we find out, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, and it's not, as I mentioned before, the monk who's assigned to do to work with the animals. It's not productive work. It's work that's driving us away from things that are actually productive to ourselves, whether that be spiritually or otherwise. And when we think of that, we need to think of how much time we actually have in the day. So a lot of things that I think are reflective in our modern culture is that we have a lot of commutes. A lot of us commute to work or commute to any given place. When we're commuting somewhere, let's say we have like a 30-minute drive, what are we doing in those 30 minutes? Are we praying? Are we possibly listening to an audiobook? Are we listening to things that are actually beneficial and doing things that can be constructive to our own well-being, rather than just kind of fast traveling somewhere where we just kind of doze off and arrive where we want to be? And that can actually be not just when we're traveling somewhere, but even in your daily life. If you're preparing dinner for yourself, What are you doing when you're preparing dinner? Are you letting your mind wander into like a million different things, or are you being focused and aware of what you're doing? This is kind of going maybe a little bit off from the initial vice, but it's encompassed by the idea of watchfulness and what are you doing with your time, and how you're managing your time. So
It's like watching a football game instead of coming to church on Saturday to help work on the school.
well, if I won't say there's this sense of if I'm not doing a service for every point of the day, like theoretically, you can fill your entire day just doing different reader services. It should be good to do something like that, but we also live in the world, and there are things that we physically just need to do to whether that's for our jobs or for responsibilities that we have for others. Like again, for those with families, we can't just say, I'm going to go lock myself in my room and not talk to anyone while I do these prayers. But that's not really, I don't think that's really listlessness in the sense of as a vice as much as the priorities that you're sorting, like these different things that could be done.
That's good for priorities. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think with listlessness, we can also view it as a sense of really a sense of priorities of what we're doing. There's always if we look at the very base level of sloth, you're imagining, sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing for like much time, whether that's just watching TV or whatever. But in reality, it's also what are you doing with the time that you're given generally, and that in of itself does not necessitate physically doing nothing at that time as much as like can you do something productive while you're doing something else. So
It can also be an excessive filling of vain activity.
Yeah.
It's not just doing nothing, it's also doing too much of vain things. So
like overtime or workaholics, people who maybe they're great at earning those extra bonuses to their paycheck or something, but question is that extra time put into work to get extra money worth losing out time with family, with friends, with the church? Is my desire to make money impeding my personal relationships and my relationship with God? That's another way that we can view that.
To what extent are we understanding these vices like emotionally in terms of the emotions involved, or are we defining them in terms of the actions or the priorities, or?
So Christ very directly challenged the pharisaical aspects of, as long as I don't physically do something, then I'm not sinning. So Christ says, those commit adultery is committed with the heart, not just like physically committing adultery. So when we say like anger, for example, yes, it is better to control yourself and not lash out, and whether that's physically or verbally attacking someone. But if every time you look at someone who you had an argument with and you're feeling hatred within you, then that's controlling you. That vice is in you. It's not expressed necessarily. Maybe you're able to keep that down, but that's still that lack of love for that individual is controlling, and we consider that just as fundamentally. I don't like to use the word problematic because it's misused these days, but it is a weight on your soul.
If we're trying to combat vices in us, how much of that is a matter of being attentive to our own emotions?
So the idea, if you may notice all around us and with these icons, is that there's very, very few icons that have direct expressions of emotion. And we understand that emotions as we understand them now are a consequence of the fall, where fundamentally in Christ is peace past understanding. And that peace does not express itself as kind of happiness necessarily. It's not this just, blanket emotionalism. It's a stability, the Christ being the stability in your heart of pursuing virtues and leaving vices, but not wrapping yourself up and carrying it out the opposite way. So like when we say hatred, yeah, so obviously the actual virtue there is love, which is combated by the vice of hatred, or the lack of love is hatred. But we can also overdo that in the sense of lust, where we have lust for someone rather than true abiding love. And in that sense, we need to be balanced, because the church always views the faith of Christ as the royal path, the middle path. And that can be just as much with emotions. If you care about someone, you also aren't obsessive over them. You also don't neglect them. So there's this idea of understanding how much is it productive and how much of it is detrimental towards something.
So the Church of Christ is the royal path, the middle path. Can you
So-
expand on that?
So that encompasses maybe a little bit past just the virtues as much as so a big thing that we have, I think, in the modern state of internet orthodoxy, for example, is this hyper focus on the correct things, on the following the canons 100% and this and that. Of course, we won't. If you try to ask them, like, okay, what are all the canons regarding this one thing, and they end up with like 50 canons, some of which actually contradict each other based on like, the circumstances they were written. In our understanding of how we approach things. For example, like let's say that you are very much overcome with zeal. There are many who find the church and go into the church, and they are so full with their love of God, but they can't transfer that into stable love. So they say, I love God, I'm going to do all the things for God, I'm going to throw out all my CDs, I'm going to destroy my TV, I'm just going to pray 24/7. And with that heightened zeal, they actually end up burning out, and they end up even sometimes falling worse than where they initially came. So our idea of the royal path extends in all aspects of our relationship with God, where we are constantly pursuing God, but we know ourselves and we understand that I was not called to be a fool for Christ. So I'm not gonna like throw away all my clothes and yell at people in an arbor. That's not my calling. And we should be humble enough to try to discern what it is that we should be doing for our benefit without without inflating our egos as being like great, spiritual pillars or anything.
I see.
It's not your calling yet, Father. You can't discredit that possibility.
Oh gosh.
So like to know thyself, then would you just ask God and pray, or
Discernment is something that needs to be discerned, and usually is done with a spiritual father. When it comes to like one of the things that is important is understanding that we as priests are not here as plan makers for you. We're not going to like guide every aspect of your life. If you text Father Colin at 1 a.m. saying that you found a fridge that was on sale and you really want to get it, is it blessed for you to get it? He's going to be less than thrilled to have that conversation. But
There will be no conversation. I'll ask you about it the next time I see you and say, did you get it or not? And that's it. So just spoiler alert. Sorry, Father.
But so when I say the royal path, I mean in terms of ourselves and how we act in the faith. So again, this aspect, I draw back to the idea of care for a person. we don't want to be obsessive. We don't want to leave. And knowing like how much we should be spending time with them, all these things are reflective of understanding the balance between those things. The same way that, we as the Orthodox faith, Orthodox meaning, proper thought, do put a lot of emphasis on the correct way of viewing things and upholding tradition. But we are a living tradition. We don't abandon the world and pretend we live in the 13th century just because we have older style iconographic art icons. We live the faith. We don't preserve some kind of utopian ideal of the past. We at the same time don't just abandon everything that we're given just because it's old and we want to be keep up with the times. There's this balance of understanding that there are times that we should uphold certain aspects and strictness. And then there are other times that we understand that, trying to mimic desert fathers in our daily lives isn't going to end up well for us.
Would you say more about dejection?
Dejection. So in a way, dejection is ultimately faithless place where you don't believe in love. In a way, you don't believe in the love of God, or you whether that's due to confession, for example, if someone believes that they've sinned and their sin is so great that God can't love them enough, or that they can't be forgiven this sin. It's fundamentally a rejection of God's love, because you feel that whatever it is that you've done or haven't done is stronger than God. This can manifest itself in a variety of ways, whether that's, again, something with a specific sin, you didn't reconcile with a loved one before they passed, or anything that really could happen, and you in yourself reject what is the ultimate love of God and say, no, God's great, but he can't forgive me for this. And then living in that despair almost becomes a desirous thing, where people kind of build the self-image of, oh, woe is me. You suddenly build yourself up to be Job or something, where you're like, oh, I'm suffering, I'm this, I'm that. And it becomes more inwardly reflective of your own kind of self-pity rather than as a reality of things.
Is that similar to acedia? Is that the way you pronounce that? ACEDIA?
The Greeks would pronounce it
sorry.
akidia, but yeah.
Acedia?
Yeah.
Is there overlap, or is it the same? Or?
There's certainly overlap. There's overlap in all of the passions, but I mean, you have akidia is kind of an underlying one. It tries to undermine the rest. So it touches on all of them, whereas certain passions are more specialized and specific, and each requires different cures. But akidia is kind of an underlying wound that attacks all the other passions.
Steadfastness, is that the remedy? I mean, that's the only I could find.
Yes, in a way, yeah. So
Struggle with it. I'm asking.
so the hopelessness that people feel ultimately is peace is found in God. And it's very easy for us to say, well, just pray and be done with it. But I mean, yes, pray and be done with it. But it's just another aspect of turning to God. Fundamentally, hopelessness and emptiness is just another lack of God.
Yeah.
In a person, and there's nothing wrong with that person in terms of like, I mean, it is something wrong, but it's not something that can't be fixed. We'll say.
Could you say more about like scenarios that would be dejection, like despairing of God's mercy if you commit a sin?
So yeah, despairing of God's mercy if you commit a sin, your perception of the world based on your own experiences or based on specific events, or you look at human evil and you say, because people are evil, therefore God is evil because he allows evil. So I'm not going to, draw up lectures about the problem of evil, but basically the problem of evil is a pretty good example of lacking trust in God's love by.
It's the third bullet point, Father, on the first page. It's the problem of evil.
Okay, the problem. I wasn't actually sure if this is, we all have that or.
Yes, everyone has that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fundamentally, it's viewing things, I guess, in a very strictly worldly sense, and imposing your view of morality on the world and saying, because things are not up to my standard, therefore, God has rejected us or something akin to that as well.
Or thinking we know the degree of the sin better than God does. Yeah, sure, God died on the cross, but he doesn't know what I did. And the reality is he knows way more than you do what you did. And he knows the weight of everything you've done way more than you do. And what has he done in response? It's the cross. That's why the cross is everywhere in the church. It's God's response to knowing ourselves better than us. People can comment.
Yes. So yeah, it's kind of shocking to say when we think about it, but Christ did not reject Hitler either. If Hitler had, at the end of his life, fully turned to God, Christ would accept him with open arms. Obviously, he didn't because he committed suicide.
That we know.
Well, that we know. But Christ saw the fullness of humanity's in its absolute evil, and still went to the cross. Every single sin committed by humanity was taken on that cross.
Could dejection also be like if something bad happens to you, and you don't trust that God is good? Or is that different?
No, that encompasses it as well. So it's again kind of viewing yourself as you're kind of martyr, or you're building up the idea of the pursuit of happiness in your life as like an ultimate goal, where you yourself kind of become the idol of your life, where you're thinking like, but I'm me, so this shouldn't be happening to me, or if this is happening to me, then why isn't it being remedied? Because I'm a good person, and God loves me, so why is this happening? In that kind of sense, I don't know if it's much more rejection of or dejection as much as just a rejection of God's love, where you say that because my life plan is not going the way I thought it should, therefore God isn't listening to me, or yada yada.
I have a friend who's studying to become a marriage counselor, and it's obvious that the sanctity of marriage is divine. And can you speak on like lust and adultery? Because I've been tempted by that myself. To me, it seems like it just destroys a marriage.
So again, the idea of these vices are that they're a distortion or a lack of the virtues that they reflect. So lust is the misappropriation, the misapplication of love that God has given to humanity. Paul says the marriage bed is undefiled. Like this is a reality of life, and that marriages exist. People have marital relations. These are not evil things. These are beautiful things in the eyes of the Lord, when used correctly and when understood as being an expression of something that's bigger than what it is. So when we take the physical aspect and turn it into the higher aspect, that's when we start to have issues, where we sort of, when we idolize the physical reality rather than the entire reality of it. So yes, when we have lust in our hearts, we're really degrading what it means to love in the sense of like even marital relations, in terms of marital relations. Like it's not, marital relations in of themselves shouldn't be a lustful act. Like you shouldn't be just doing like, oh, I feel like I want to have relations with my wife or husband, and let's just get it over with or whatever. That's fundamentally approaching it the wrong way. These
Like, what do you think is the remedy for feelings of lust? Like, is it to like, because in my eyes, it's like putting God above your spouse, essentially. Maybe
say that again.
like putting God above your spouse, your husband or wife, like looking to God.
So, as in, you think that you're saying you think that's
So like maybe one member of the marriage is having thoughts of infidelity,
Hmm.
and like how do you overcome that phase?
so. I think it really depends on the individual situation, but fundamentally, if there are issues that are affecting or directly affecting the marriage, then those things should be honestly talked about with both members. You're fundamentally, our understanding of marriage is that two become one become one flesh. So when, if I have a stroke and half my body is under the effects of that stroke, then there's not a wholeness there. There's something wrong happening there. So in order for us in a marriage, and since we don't have the just plainly, like, we don't have mind reading abilities, even the closest marriages don't have mind reading abilities. We need to understand that sometimes a lot of these problems can be resolved by just talking it out. And it sounds very, non how do I say, it's not a very developed solution. Fundamentally, if you just express that there is an issue, that's the first step towards something.
What about fasting? Is that really generalizes to a lot of the other, me at least, temptations, we can control that. And
So fasting, marital relation fasting is, I assume that's what you're.
well, I'm
No, I
talking
think
about,
starting fasting in
no,
general, right?
he's asked about remedies, and I don't know what they are, but I'm just thinking like, for all the passions, it's like fasting as I got better with it. Like there's a negative correlation between fasting and lust. That's what I was.
No, yeah. I mean, fasting is given to us as fundamentally as a tool. It's not, fasting is not a checklist. It's fundamentally something that you're doing for yourself to control your passions, whether that be lustful or gluttony or listlessness by, adding extra prayers during the time, or I guess technically almsgiving is not technically fasting, but it goes with fasting. It's not like its own separate thing. These are all things that help build up our virtues. So, yeah.
But St. John Cassian also makes it abundantly clear that without fasting, conquering lust is impossible. It will not happen in any way, shape, or form. If you don't control it, if you don't learn to control your stomach, none of the other carnal passions will fall in line.
Which
Like
thing?
ever. St. John Cassian.
Is that essentially?
He is in this book, Theologia Volume 1. You have it?
Yeah,
On the eight-
to read it.
On the 8 Vices. It's short. There are no pictures, though. Sorry.
Does it pop up?
No, there's no pop-ups. There should be a pop-up of the 8 Vices. Well, that's like all of the pictures. I think we have it actually in the children's room of like a portrait of a virtuous life, the portrait of the
Oh, yeah.
vice filled life, the Russian one. You know that one? Yeah, it's like that. It's kind of like a pop-up. You can just throw that in the Philopolia and call it good. But that, I mean, that's the kind of the baseline, if you don't mind, of conquering that, especially in a marriage, and conquering lust is to be able to master control of one's carnal desires, and that begins through the control of the stomach. But then also understanding that love fundamentally is self-sacrificing and is for the sake of the other, and lust is what should be directed outward, directed inward. It's a focus on one's own desires, on fulfilling one's own needs instead of seeking the needs of the other. So ultimately, for infidelity and for temptations in that regard, what we need to do is we need to figure out how we can serve our spouse radically. And before we're married, how we can serve our neighbor. So both with fasting and figuring out how we can direct this energy, which is the energy to love, towards others instead of directing it at ourselves. How can we give ourselves to others in a way that's conducive to our own current state, whether it be married or not?
I was wondering, so how is this largely a matter of habituation when it comes to fasting and lust, that kind of thing? Like, if you're not in the habit of controlling your impulses, it will be impossible to do so.
Well, people are fundamentally creatures of habit. We have habits. If you develop good habits, virtues, then these things will carry you through. And you won't become perfect, obviously, by just coasting on what you have. You have to build up your spiritual strength in time. But if you're able to establish regular cadence of fasting as the church gives us, every Wednesday, every Friday, then you'll find that things, I don't say get easier, but get lighter.
They're manageable.
Yeah.
It seems like it's because fasting and asceticism and so on, you get all kinds of traditions, because that seems to be a common element of human psychology. But it seems like it's fundamentally different from pride and despair, where the problem there isn't primarily impulse control. It's something more fundamental. I don't know if that's right, but
Yeah. So it's again, these fundamentally, fasting is a tool. It's something to help you control yourself, and it is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Some people will end up being, the desert fathers, where they will fast all their lives. And when we say fast, we mean in all aspects. So their prayer rule is going to look a lot more involved than what we can realistically put upon ourselves. But the idea is just consistency. Fundamentally, it's consistency. Because if you can go, let's say you do 3 days without eating anything, and you're praying 12 hours out of those days. If you only do it like once in your life, what benefit is that to you? And then you don't fast any other point in your life, and that does not help you. As Paul says, the athletes are not crowned during the race. It's at the end of the race that the victors receive their crowns. And I think that's a very important thing, is that there's not, virtues and vices are not check marks. You don't get dinged points just because you fell into a vice, and you don't gain points because you're being virtuous. These are things that are guiding you towards Christ. And if we need to take smaller steps, so be it. As long as we're approaching Christ, that is the important aspect. Any other?
I have a problem with cigarettes, and I was really beating myself up today because I would stop the past few days. It's like a whole day without smoking. At the end of the day, I would be like, oh, I can't do this. Buy a pack of cigarettes. Yeah, I guess we were talking about dejection and despair, and I was feeling really down. And I had a conversation with my brother about how it's basically a sin to stay in that state. And would you agree with that? And so is the thing to do just to keep trying to quit, basically?
So one way to view is that there is no stasis in the church. There's not, I'm okay with God, and I'm just going to sit as being okay with God. There's no such thing. You're either growing closer to Christ or you're falling away. And, Christ always has his hand open to you. You just have to go to it. And when we realize that when we are in despair, we're basically saying, Christ is at the door, and we're just, you'll say, I'll get him later, or, oh, I can't do it, or all these kind of excuses we've built up for ourselves, really fundamentally is our own I don't know how to say it in a non-weird way, but it's like an aesthetic we built for ourselves. Like we kind of pity ourselves, and we're building up this kind of sad man image of ourselves rather than just saying, moving on past it.
It's like I feel like I have this fear of being like, unworthy. I mean, which like I am.
I think, especially regarding tobacco. Have you ever smoked tobacco?
Pipe, yes.
Okay, especially with cigarettes, though. I think it's important to recognize the source of these feelings, right? The feeling of rejection and the things. So when you smoke the cigarette, the feeling goes away, right?
Yeah.
What happens after you smoke the cigarette?
I feel guilty about smoking.
Feel guilty, and then what happens when you feel guilty? That guilt turns into
I have like a hate for myself.
hatred, which turns into stress, which turns into greater anxiety, which is only resolved how?
Acceptance? I don't know.
Not acceptance. It's only resolved in that kind of loop of addiction through smoking, because smoking is the only thing that's taking away the very thing it's giving you,
I see.
right? It's
Like, well, I mean, that's the trap, I guess.
it's the trap. It's the trap of any addictive behavior. It is producing the conditions that you're trying to free yourself from. It'd be like putting on shoes that are too small, walking 10 miles just to take them off and feel the relief of taking off the shoes, right? That's basically what tobacco is.
I mean, I'm a nurse too, and like the truth of the matter is you feel so much better when you smoke.
Right.
It's just kind of an illusion and a delusion, the whole thing. It's just, I don't know. One day it will overcome it. So
I think it's good to recognize that, especially with something like that, this is what's causing the stress. This is what's causing my inability to process these things. And then this is true of many other things. It's not just cigarette smoking, but addictive behavior, especially, and passions that lead into that. It's the passion itself is what causes the things that we try to alleviate. And I think if you keep that in mind, that really helps.
you say that one more time, the passions
The-
themselves.
The passion itself is the cause of the things we're trying to alleviate ourselves from, right? So the tobacco is the cause of the anxiety, is the cause of the stress, is the cause of the hatred, and it is providing itself as a solution. That's why people get hooked to drugs so easily, right? Because the drug gives us a quote unquote high of freedom from whatever, but then the moment we get off that high, it's just misery.
Yeah, and you said, I think, that it also takes us out of the struggle, so we can't make progress. Is that
Right.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
And like the struggle is like the struggle to reach God, like reaching for God. Isn't that what kind of humanity is? We're in a fallen state, and we can either choose to like stay down and sin or continue to reach for God. Would you agree with that?
Fundamentally, yeah. That is, I think, one of the key understandings the church has is that it is not something that is imposed upon us, and it is not something that we can acquire in a given, again, I like this idea of countering checklist. It's not a checklist. It's not something that you're able to just mark off and say, yeah, got it. It's something you're constantly striving for. Any other thoughts, questions?
Did you say that Satan is like the epitome of all these sins to the maximum degree?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, Satan lacks anything. Satan wants you to have nothing either. So that is fundamentally what Satan's goal is not to it's not to give you negative stuff. It's just simply to take away.
Like that's like basically. I'm sorry.
But if he were to manifest one of the 8 vices, it would be pride,
I had that thought too.
which is the undermining of all of the other passions. Because what pride does attributes the virtues to oneself.
That's
So-
basically thinking that you're better than God at times.
Right. Well, and denying that God is the source of all of those things, right? God is the source of all good. And anything that we do that's good, we only do because God has given us the knowledge of it and the capability to do it. But if one then says, no, it's because of me, I did these things, right? And Satan was like the archangel he was beautiful. He made beautiful music. And instead of attributing it to God and using his music to praise God, he said, this is mine. I did this. I'm the source of it. And took that virtue that God had given him and claimed ownership of it. And it was because of this he was cast out. So
Bad move.
it's a bad move. And yeah, it's a bad move. It didn't work out too well for him. And we know it won't work out well for him.
Right.
But that's something that St. John in this book, and you'll see the fathers talk about elsewhere, the passions are described as demons, as personalities, as individuals who try and draw us away from virtue, because the demonic manifests these things. If that makes sense. So
Are you going to do a class on, truth?
that was mostly last week, but
We're not gonna work on that.
no, we're done. We're done. We're no more. No, I mean we can talk about it. We can think about it, and kind of give a bit more of a, but
This was good because our class didn't do passion.
we tried. I tried to implement it, but there was only so much we could do with
Oh, reading we
you read about them. You read about them. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna talk about the sin of anger, and I'm also thinking about like loving thy neighbor, and like the relationship with my father is kind of contentious because growing up he had a lot of anger, and now he's at a point where he's nearing the end of his life, and like I really want to be there for him, but it's like I still have anger in me, and I'm trying to like love that neighbor, I guess. And so I don't know, like at what, because I feel like he's just so manipulative and controlling, and it's like hard for us to have a conversation, especially about God. I mean, he does not want to talk about God, and or he just gets angry when I bring it up. And so, like, at what point do you just like have to separate yourself from that, or I don't know. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I do. And I think one thing that people maybe hear and don't really actualize is the idea of praying for someone that you hate and praying for someone that you want to be closer to, but you can't maybe spend your time with. So we have a great example actually behind Father Colin, which is Saint Monica, who prayed every day for years for the conversion of her son Augustine, who at that time was enraptured with all kinds of silliness.
He was a bad kid.
Was a bad kid,
Real bad kid.
but what did she do? She didn't just follow along with his antics and say, you know what you're doing is fine, but let's do this other thing, and hound him. Like Monica did not hound Augustine in every aspect. The biggest and most impactful thing she did for Augustine is pray for him. And when we realize that prayer is not just something we say when we want to kind of just not do something and just, I'll pray on it, or I'll pray for this or that. When we realize that prayer it's important, then we can approach those situations with a little more peace and a little bit handle situations that really probably would not be better with our direct involvement.
I see. Yeah, I'm coming to realize that prayer is like
So yeah, I think Monica as an excellent example for even we have some members of the church whose families are not Orthodox, and it causes some tension in terms of like, oh, why do you, why do you worship Mary or whatever other thing they say? Like, sure, you can have an argument about it and say, well, all these other facts, and like, but fundamentally, if you're not approaching it with love and prayer, then sometimes it's better not to say it.
Right.
Do you have a hack or something to pray from the heart for the people that you are having a hard time loving?
So
There's no hack.
I'm afraid there's
Be
not.
nicer.
There's not specific incense that you can light and then suddenly say, I'm in. Fundamentally, it's praying.
Because I'm
and-
missing something when I talk with a couple of people,
Allow the grief to be converted into prayer.
Okay,
Grief is very powerful, and
I gotcha.
yeah.
Well, I think anger is sad.
Instead of it being a reaction towards the person, let it be a reaction towards God. So instead of wanting to lash out at the person and respond to what they're saying, talk to God. Bring it up to God.
I don't make it personal about the person, but it's like either God or Satan working through that person, kind of.
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that instead of allowing these conflicts to be an opportunity to breed further conflict with the person, we should bring it to the Lord first. St. Porphyrios of Kapsokalidia, he says that we should speak to God more. We should speak to God about our children, or about, in this case, our father or whoever, more than we speak to our father or whoever about God, right? So we should allow these opportunities, instead of being opportunities to react and try and correct the person in real time. We should allow it to be an opportunity to bring it to God and put it at his feet and let him deal with it, and let him work on that person's heart.
I think it's also useful to view things from the lens of eternity. So our lives are very, very, very short, even like if we compare it to human history, let alone the entirety of, the existence of God being omnipresent. So when we approach these things, understanding that, this argument means so little in my week, means so little in my month, put it to eternity. Then, like, why even get that invested in hatred when it's so insignificant?
I think pride for me is like, how dare you? Like they wouldn't have the right to do whatever, say whatever they want or something.
So with that, so pride here, as Father Collins said, pride is probably the if you were to encapsulate one vice in the devil, that being pride, where we kind of talked about this earlier, was the idea of despondency, where it's you're your own idol, where you're saying, like, bad things can happen to me, therefore I'm sad, therefore I should be pitiable. Why is God helping me? Versus I'm me, so why are these people being mean to me? Versus, like, fundamentally, there's an underlying pride in that feeds these other, or I guess starves these other aspects.
I have to watch Man of God ever so often, just to watch it on the screen, to see what it would look like.
Yeah, I think it's always good to look to the lives of the saints. There have been so many who were abused in levels that we will never never reach, or fall from heights that we could only imagine being in. So it's good always to look at the saints and see how much they suffered.
And then see how bad your insult was.
Yeah,
It's like late,
Oh, he said I was weirdo. Like, what does that even? Why do I care? Any other thoughts?
Can the internet people hear us still? And awfully quiet. Don't think you can escape from comments or questions.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Very good.
That's fair. No, I did have one question. What is the corresponding virtue for the vice of self-esteem? Because usually, like in our society, we would think of self-esteem as being a virtue.
So I think based on the definition that was given in the Philopolia, it's I don't know if is there a word for pure intentions then?
What's humility?
Humility?
It's humility.
Humility. So instead of pursuing things for the sake of yourself or glorification of yourself, it's for your neighbor and for God.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a virtue that would correspond with self-esteem. It's more so that self-esteem undermines the other virtues in that you do them for the sake of others instead of for the sake of God. So the corresponding virtue would be simply doing the virtues for the sake of God. Is what the Lord says, when you give your alms, do not let the right hand know what the left is doing. In other words, don't do things publicly. Don't talk about the good things you did. Don't talk about, say you do 50 prostrations. Don't go tell somebody, oh man, I'm so sore from doing 50 prostrations. Or, oh, go into work and your coworkers are like, why do you look miserable? Oh, it's because I've been fasting so hard. All of this is self-esteem. This is the vice of self-esteem. It's just taking the other virtues and using them as a pedestal.
Is this another word for vainglory?
Yes,
Say it again.
vainglory.
Wait, what did you, how do you set that up? What about another word for it?
It's synonymous for self-esteem.
Oh, vainglory is self, okay, gotcha.
What's the difference between self-esteem and pride? Like among ours, they're the only ones that are sort of intuitively, like clearly different for me.
I think best way would view it is one is the process, the other one's the justification of the process.
Can you expound on that?
So the vainglory or self-esteem, I feel like word meanings imply something else. But one is you're doing maybe even the right things, but for the wrong reasons. The other is you're just doing things for your own sake.
That'd be pride?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
The latter is pride, the former is vainglory.
Yeah, so the one who has self-esteem, they may be doing things for the sake of God, but then they'll offer it up to others and say, look at what I'm doing. Whereas with pride, it's I am the source of these things.
And then wasn't there like flashy almsgiving? In theory, that could be either of these, depending on what the underlying passion, motivation. But like,
Yeah, like if you're saying, look how great I am for giving alms versus like, oh, I can't donate because I gave alms
Or this is my money to give. Nobody gave me this. This is mine. This is not from God, right? That would be pride.
because atheists just don't say that. Like, I can do. Look, if people can do good things without God. That's proof of our self-sufficiency or whatever.
Right. And that fundamentally is pride. And then self-esteem would be, once again, because they can go together. It would be that person believing that they're the source of the good, but then doing it so everyone else can see, right? It's like that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza is he ends up getting his boss addicted to calzones, and he tips the owner of the calzone shop whenever the guy's not looking. So the guy thinks he's not tipping. And then he tries so desperately to get the guy to see him doing the good thing that he reaches into the tip jar. And that's when the guy finally turns around and sees him, and he's banished from the calzone place. And he ends up losing his job because he doesn't give the guy calzones. But that's basically what self-esteem is like, I'm so desperate to be seen in what I'm doing that I'm even willing to completely debase myself in order to do it.
So it's egotistic.
In a sense.
I feel like that's more pride. Egotistical. I don't know. They're very, they're subtle.
Yeah.
Jackie, you were saying, you were saying something? Or you wanted to say something? We'll do hand things work here.
You just say, Jackie, say something. You're raising your hand. Or Steve, whichever one is raising their hand.
Yeah, sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
Hey,
we can hear you.
Sorry about that. The system wasn't letting me turn the stuff on to say or speak or anything else like that. So I have a question or clarification. Self-esteem in my lexicon means confidence in one's own worth or abilities. Are you sure self-esteem is the word you guys mean, or are you looking for something else? Because it doesn't seem like it's a pride thing, being knowing that you're good at something. It's not so
That's
much
the word that
doing.
John Cassian uses to
Yeah.
describe the passion. So you would
Okay,
have
I'm
you
not
would have to
hear the whole thing. I had to walk in and
file
out and miss part of it.
It's,
Sorry, go ahead.
it might be,
investigation of the thing.
it might be just a way of translating it and the word when it was translated versus what the word means now. And like,
Well, it was translated like 10 years ago.
well, there's translations of biblical things saying about, even just songs say gay, but it doesn't mean homosexual.
Well, and the issue here is that English is an incredibly vague language.
Yeah.
And I'm finally getting an opportunity to speak about my thesis unprovoked. English is vague. English is incapable of there is no one definition for words, and Greek words are almost impossible to translate into English. So yes, self-esteem does mean this, but self-esteem also means having an accurate assessment of one's own capabilities. Those are both true, but this is not the self-esteem that St. John is talking about, if that makes sense. Which is why we should all learn Greek. That's a little more extreme, but at least have an understanding of that. English is very difficult to convey, very, very complex truths. And so there are things that are very often lost.
Yeah.
Does that get you, Steve? You turned off your camera. So he's gone. He's like, this is over.
In this case, it would be like you need the praise of others to maintain a self-esteem.
Yeah.
So there is a psychological literature on this, because there was this giant self-esteem movement, like in the 2000s especially, and it kind of wrecked people because the focus was inward, and the self-conscious emotions are not fun to have, right? We hear more joy, and so that was a criticism of that, and it sort of went away. We'll be back in a different.
Right. There's nothing new under the sun, and that's kind of what St. John is talking about here, right? Is this not just an understanding of one's worth or capabilities, but a desire for that to be known and recognized by everyone else to be seen.
Well, and also, like, it doesn't follow me if I think I'm smart or good looking. It matters if people I'm with. I mean, I don't know how valuable the whole project is of self-esteem,
Right. And with the virtues, it doesn't matter what other people think. It's what God thinks.
Yeah.
We're offering it to the Lord, and this is for his sake. So it's like with almsgiving, right? Almsgiving is one of the most, for the modern man, it's one of the most infuriating things, especially with social media where we have to post everything in our lives. Like you don't tell people, you're doing it. I guess the modern definition of self-esteem would be like, I gave money to a homeless man, so I'm going to make a video about it now. Or those people who like make those videos where they're just giving out money to people. And it's like, that's not virtuous. It's not virtuous. You are doing a good action, but just giving it away, just casting it. Huh?
Better than some of the videos.
It's better than some videos, yes. But ultimately, it's a question of who are you offering these actions to? Are you offering it to God, or are you offering it to man? If you're offering it to man, it's like pearls before swine. It's just you're casting it to whoever.
Isn't it in conflict though with also the idea that all glory to God, not me?
Right.
And it's something God gave.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that I think the thing for me that makes God so important, and the reason that I found Jesus Christ in God was basically coming to a realization of like the true evils in the world. And I guess that was just my path to Jesus Christ. It's like coming face to face with like a really bad thing. And like that makes me realize how important all of this is, and like how these vices that we're talking about, it's not something to like mess around with, basically. It's a struggle, like I was talking about with the cigarettes. So, but just a comment that I had, I suppose.
I've heard that very much lately.
Yeah, a lot of bad things out there.
Famous people even that come on and say, look, I just saw so much, I can't understand it. There's no frame of reference except for this to understand it. Or it's bottom.
Any other thoughts on the vices described? Gluttony, which includes over drinking.
It also includes under everything.
What, pardon?
It also includes under eating.
Really?
Yes.
Hey, explain.
All of the passions need to be understood as either excess or absence. So like think of the anorexic, right? This manic deprivation of food for the sake of a disorder, right? That is gluttony. You even look at like the kind of health culture where like I know I have coworkers who are like, some of whom are even like Roman Catholic and they don't keep the Lenten fast, but they will do intermittent fasting and they will starve themselves for days for the sake of a physical appearance, right? That is gluttony. It's an obsession over and a control. The physical is driving your actions to that point, right? So it's fasting to this like this complete, it's a complete distortion of fasting. And fasting's not starving yourself either, right? Fasting is not, if you're starving while you're fasting, you're doing it wrong. That's something that St. John is very adamant about, and all the fathers, right? It's you're giving your body what it needs, and that's it. Cutting it off there, full stop. So
Reminds me of a comic of, oh boy, the Lenten season, I get to lose a couple pounds. Like that's not the that's not the point.
Lent is carbo loading anyway. You don't lose weight.
Lose muscle.
Yep.
Was it Murray had a patient he was telling me about who's Catholic, and I think you asked, "What are you giving up for Lent?" And this woman said, "Olives."
Olives.
That's hard. That's a struggle. Yeah, that's rough.
Can I just say something? I was listening to last week's YouTube of this, and you can't hear anybody out here, so you don't know what the question.
So we should repeat the question
Yeah.
into the audio.
It's a little late into the session.
Well, yes.
Noted for
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah.
This is a continuous development kind of thing. So whoever's doing it next week, not me, will hopefully. No offense to any of you, but
I think one thing that I kind of wanted to mention that we kind of overlook is that if you do not feel particularly challenged in a specific vice, let's say that you are not necessarily drawn to lustful things. Let's say like you just don't care, like that's not something, that's not a virtue. That's simply a natural characteristic that you have. So if you, for example, are also someone who doesn't care much about money and you're willing to just give money away, you giving money away is not, that doesn't build up your virtue. That isn't challenging yourself. That's something that God's given you as a good thing, but that's not something that you should be viewing as like your own accomplishment. That's just something that you have a natural inclination either towards or against.
But if God took that, like the lustful eye away, that's glory to God, though, right? So if you had it and you lost it, it doesn't mean it means that God helped you, right?
well, yeah, and ultimately that means that who gets the glory there, right? God, which is the antithesis of pride. It's humility. It's recognizing that these things aren't from ourselves.
And I think that's yes, fundamentally from God, but also so sometimes you hear this idea of like, well, at least I'm not this or like that. Like if you, out of these things, if you say out of these 7 things, I really like, I just don't care about lustful things. I don't care about eating. I just eat to like sustain myself, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you not being challenged for 7 out of 8 of these things is not something you should be, happy or prideful about. That's just something that was presented to you. Whether that, God knows why that is, but these are not something that we should be looking for and say like, oh,
Okay.
I'm such a good, faster because I don't care about eating. It's not you.
Yeah. So can you say a
God's
little bit-
merciful. He's protected you from all of them and just given you one to struggle with.
Well, I've thought about this because I'm not a foodie. I just don't like to eat kind of chore. So I'm like, how am I benefiting from? Even when I was a little bit, I just didn't like that emphasis on table for hours and stuff. So I'm always thinking like, well, am I fasting the right way? Is there a better way to fast? Because for me, I'm just like what you said. It's just never been an issue.
Well, then that's, God's grace has given you a lighter approach to fasting then, because some people really do struggle with.
Should I make it harder?
Well, that's something you should talk about with your spiritual father in terms of, but we need to remember fasting is it's not just eating. If you say that the food aspect of fasting is very easy for you, then are you challenging yourself with prayers? Are you able to pass the day without lustful thoughts? Like if God has granted you a rock in one of the virtues, we don't just call that good enough and then like say, this is good enough, but the other ones I'm struggling with, but like at least I have this. No.
Yeah.
At that point, we should say, thank God that I have strength in this field. Let me focus on the other fields.
Okay. I'm more worried that I'm not benefiting. But you're right. You helped me.
And you may not have any idea of what benefit you're receiving from it until the heavenly kingdom.
Okay.
Right? It's like you read Matthew 25 and those who are condemned and those who are saved were equally surprised.
So I would even say like, then we should be even careful with that. So if you say that God has granted you the grace to be, especially virtuous for lack of, risk of gluttony, then we should be careful not to ruin the response, like the higher expectation that God has given us. So, the same with you can almost do it the same way with clergy. The higher you go in the clergy, the more responsibility you get with no benefit. So like if you're great at fasting, great. That's the same benefit to someone who fasts and struggles with it. But if you fall and you had no great struggle with it, then that's worse for you than someone who actually struggles and failed to do so.
It would be like the same, somebody who struggles with anger, like if there's like a naturally patient person. That's not
If you're naturally patient, that's a grace that was given to you, but that's not to your benefit. That's, if anything, that's something to keep an eye on, is that if I really don't struggle with anger, then I should have no excuse as to getting angry with this person for any other given reason. So.
Can you just briefly talk about gluttony as the sin of Adam and Eve? Because it kind of seems to me that it's like somewhat superficial. It's not really as much about the food itself as it was like processes that were associated with the food and like the pride of wanting to be like God.
So maybe you have more developed nuance to that. I would say something more of like a reflection of pride, but I know that's not what you're specifically asking why gluttony.
Well, since I wrote the note, it's not the food aspect. It's the failure to control. It's the failure to say, I'm not going to do that. And in the most fundamental action, which is eating, right? Eating is the most base thing we can do for ourselves. So in failing to do the most basic mode of self-control, they fell into everything else. So yeah, it's not just the eating of the apple, right? They were given the choice and they chose. They just did not allow themselves to say, I'm not going to do that. And that's why fasting is the fundamental virtue and control of the stomach is the fundamental virtue. Because if you can control your stomach, then everything else falls in line. It's the foundation of Christian life. That's why, traditionally Christians are received on Nativity and on Pascha, because they are preceded by 40 days of fasting. It's through fasting that we re-enter into the Christian life. Adam and Eve fell through a lack of fasting. If you read the service, especially the Sunday of the casting out of Adam, the day before Lent begins. That's a really good one for this. It's all about how we enter fasting is the means, or is the mode of existence for the saints, which is it is simply a conscious choice to abstain from everything wicked.
What was your vote in that?
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yeah, just read the whole thing. That's also the gospel reading for the casting out of it. Sunday, the casting out of Adam is Matthew 25.
Any other thoughts?
But what I can do is I can also send an examination of conscience so we can see how these things that we've discussed play out in the real world, right? What this looks like on the ground. And it's a good idea to start looking at something like this and saying, where do I struggle in this regard? And then talking to either Father Gregory, myself, or Father Dimitri and say, how do I deal with this? And beginning that struggle, because that's the most important thing, is recognizing the passions that are within ourselves or the vices, and figuring out how do I do something about it? Because we have to do something about it. We can't do nothing about it. We can't just let it.
And I think one of the important things is when you're approaching it is also to be honest with yourself, because you can say you're a terrible person, like yada yada yada, and I'm so sinful, and like what exactly? Because we can all say these kind of very generalist things, but like specifically, like, what am I struggling with? When am I actually struggling with? Have I wasted time? If I've wasted that time, like, is there reasons for it? So digging deeper instead of just this kind of generalist waving of hand of like, yeah, I did all these things. I don't know if you were going to expand on like confessions generally, but the way, like, when you approach confession when you're baptized should not be, you should view it as the same as going to a doctor. Going to the doctor, if you say, oh doc, I'm hurt, doc's gonna just stare at you like, okay, like
Congratulations.
what? like what? But at the same time, if you say, I was coughing up phlegm, and the phlegm was this RGB value with this weight and this viscosity, he doesn't need to know that. Like, he doesn't need to know the excessive details as to what it is. But you need to be honest enough with the doctor or clergy to explain what the issue is so they can help you, but not enough to bury with details and spend 5 minutes detailing a sin which you didn't need to delve into those details for.
That's very important. That's very important. If you're confessing on a regular basis, which should be, every other week or so, your confession should not be any more than 15 minutes. And even that's pushing it. And usually what that ends up being is just scrupulosity of just, I did this sin. Here's every circumstance surrounding. We don't need to know that. Perhaps the priest will ask for details. Say, why did you fall into this? And there, but yeah, just building on that. Less is more.
I physically fought my brother. Okay, I don't need to know how many uppercuts, how much this, that. Like that's not the point.
Or the 5 years of arguments that led to you fist fighting your brother. It's just.
But honestly, it's the being honest with ourselves. Like, we're at a certain point, then we start glorifying the sin by saying like, oh, I struggled so valiantly with the sin, but then I sinned, and I didn't sin that bad. It was kind of like these circumstances. Then we invent excuses for ourselves.
But also going
And it
into
was
detail.
because this person wronged me, that's why I did it.
That's right. And then you're confessing the other person's sins. Now, the most important thing in that regard is if you're giving great detail in your sins, what it does is it just sets up the groundwork for you to fall into it again. You're thinking about the conditions, you're thinking about the circumstances, and you're just gearing yourself up for another fall.
And I think this mentions how, I'm pretty sure this was mentioned in your notes, how the vices are kind of like light, wherein darkness is not in of itself a thing. It's just a lack of light. If you if you notice that there's certain vices that are tied to certain conditions, the best thing you can do is flip on the lights. Just don't put yourself in these situations. Like we mentioned before about, family members or friends that we honestly just struggle not to fight with or to have good thoughts about. Just pray for them. Don't put yourself in situations that you're going to have issues. Maybe. But yeah, just in that sense, we can flip on the proverbial lights and don't tempt yourself. Don't put yourself in situations. For example, like social media. I don't have social media because I hate social media. But like, if you know that going on a certain page is going to have posts that are going to be lustful or going to have make you angry because of political reasons or whatever, then just don't go. Just don't go there. Be honest with yourself. Say, I don't need to see this. It's all that's going to do is make me angry. It's going to make me lustful. It's going to do this, that. That's one of the most important things is when we build an environment for these, or if we, I would say build an environment. If we block out things that can help us, then we're going to be in darkness. And in the darkness, we're going to have these issues. So.
Well, we could even pray for those that patient for us. That's what I've not been doing.
But that's still, avoiding the darkness by not putting yourself in that situation. So sometimes that requires discernment, knowing, like, being honest with ourselves and saying, is this causing me issues? And if it is, can I cut myself out from it? Like, if you have a coworker who's a big issue, like, maybe that's unavoidable, but we can try our gosh darn hardest not to make it an issue. You were raising your.
Oh, it's about coworkers, yeah.
So, all things are for the individual's salvation, all aspects of your life, from your birth to your death, everything has been done for your own salvation and how you approach it. So, but we're also, we have free will. We're not on a roller coaster of no control. We have actions that we can take, and if our actions to take can be beneficial for us, we should do it. In case of like work, like if we have to interact with someone, let's be cordial. Let's keep things professional. Let's just have these conversations as bare as we can without being rude. Because you're in that situation and you have to go through that situation. But does that mean, you should be hanging around the water cooler if you know that you're going to start arguing about politics and you're very invested in politics? Probably should avoid it.
Coworkers are especially good for attaining the heavenly kingdom.
They will help us.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? All right, well, it's 8:20, so
It's time.
right, do we,
We say a prayer.
and then, okay.
Say a prayer and then we end the meeting.
Well, just really quick, no one in the Zoom, or not Zoom, whatever this is, Meet.
We'll meet.
Is anyone have questions, or is everyone good?
We're good. That was a
All
good
right.
discussion. Thank you.
Once, twice sold. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed, most blameless, and mother of our God, more honorable than the Seraphim, beyond compare, glorious, and the Seraphim without corruption, give us birth to God, the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Thank you, Father, for the talk.
Watch a Seinfeld episode for.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, we need that. It's like a substitute.
Have a good night.
Send me on
Thank you.
Thank you.